Hello, everyone. Before we start, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment with where you from and what time it is. That way, YouTube will keep pulling you stories like this. Now, let the shadows take over. Story 1, The Midnight Isle Stalker, Mr. Raymond Watts. I moved to Denver, Colorado in the January 2022. Desperate for a fresh start. I was Lena Harper, 26, and the only job I could secure right away was the graveyard shift at the local Dollar Max, a sprawling, brightly lit tomb of cheap plastic and discounted goods. The nights were long and monotonous. After midnight, the store became a hollow cavern. The only constant sound was the oppressive, high-pitched hum of the fluorescent lights above the cheap metal shelves, a sound that always seemed to push down on your skull. Once the last customer left and the manager locked the door, the metallic click of the alarm and was the final, definitive sound of total isolation. My routine was simple: stock shelves, polish the counter, and wait for the sun. Then I met Mr. Raymond Watts. He was about 45, unremarkable in every way, which only made his presence more unsettling. He was a regular, but not a shopper. He would appear around 100 a.m., always carrying a single bottle of generic soda, and proceed to loiter. He didn't browse. He simply walked the aisles slowly, deliberately, his movements creating a faint, unsettling echo of shopping carts in the empty space. I started with polite smiles and professional greetings. He never smiled back. He would simply stare at me for a beat too long, his eyes deep set and colorless, registering my presence without acknowledging my humanity. The initial discomfort quickly escalated into inner irritation. He wasn't just loitering. He was timing me. If I moved to the cleaning supplies aisle, he would be at the end of the adjacent snack aisle, watching. If I went to the back storage room for 10 minutes, I would return to find him exactly where I left him, standing near the front of the store, perfectly still, his back to the registers. It was a constant, visual intrusion into my solitude. The silence of the store became poisoned. I started checking the clock obsessively, waiting for 2:30 a.m., the hour he usually left. But one night, he didn't. I watched him pay for his soda, his movements slow and clumsy. The manager, a tired man who valued his sleep more than security, gave him a cursory nod. The front door locked, the alarm clicked, and the lights stayed on. I began my usual restocking near the paper goods. I glanced up and saw the telltale outline of his jacket outside the large front windows. He was standing on the curb looking in. I rationalized. He forgot something. He's waiting for a ride. I went back to work. 10 minutes later, I glanced up. He was still there, but he had moved closer to the glass, standing directly beneath the Dollar Max sign. He wasn't looking at the store, he was looking at me. His face, slightly distorted by the reflection and the plate glass, was unnervingly close. The irritation was instantly replaced by cold, paralyzing dread. I felt the familiar hum of the fluorescent lights turn into a high-pitched scream in my ears. I walked slowly to the front, my heart hammering. I raised my hand and pointed to the closed sign. He didn't move. He simply leaned his head against the glass and smiled. It was the same hollow, practiced grimace I'd seen on the man in Dayton, a smile that felt less like human emotion and more like an anatomical defect. I spent the next 3 hours hiding in the small security office, watching the silent feed of the empty aisles, terrified to move. When the manager returned at 600 a.m., Mr. Watts was gone. The fear, however, didn't leave. It began to colonize my mind. The manager refused to confront him, citing low staffing and the fact that Mr. Watts never technically broke the law inside the store. The violation deepened into our intimate terror. A week later, I was cleaning the back storage room, a cluttered, unlit space where the air hung heavy and smelled of cardboard and concrete dust. The room was always locked, accessible only by a key I kept on my belt. I knelt down to organize a stack of misplaced air fresheners. As I stood up, I noticed something on the dusty concrete floor, directly beneath the only small, high window that faced the rarely used alley. There were footprints. They were large, masculine prints, tracked in with dry mud, ending just beneath the high window. The window itself was small, locked, and far too high to be a comfortable entry point, but the prints were undeniable. And then I saw the detail that sent me spiraling. Next to the prints was a clear small pile of ash, the remnants of a cigarette. Mr. Watts was the only smoker who frequented the store after hours. The realization hit me with nauseating force. He hadn't been outside the windows. He had been inside. He had somehow found a way into the storage room, the only place I went to escape the eyes of the main floor. He had been waiting in the dark, perhaps watching me through the cracked door as I worked the register, using the smoke as a temporary way to pass the time. The metallic click of the alarm had meant nothing. I didn't call the manager. I didn't call the police. I took the next flight out of Denver, leaving the cheap shelves and the screaming fluorescent hum behind me. The only thing I cared about was putting distance between myself and the footprints in the dust. It's been 8 months. I am Phoenix, Arizona. Now, the air is dry and hot. The buildings are modern, and I work a safe, remote job from my apartment. The silence here is absolute, the beautiful, expensive silence of a secured top-floor unit. I woke up suddenly. 3:00 a.m. The time was a cold punch to the gut. I was awake, tense, staring into the darkness of my new bedroom. The silence was broken by an impossibly small, yet perfectly distinct sound, echoing from the street below. It was the echo of a shopping cart. Not rolling, not bumping, but the slow, high-pitched squeak of a slightly rusty wheel being pushed slowly, deliberately, across the asphalt. I scrambled out of bed and rushed to the window. I pulled the blind back a fraction, my heart threatening to burst through my chest. The street below was empty, just the silent, dry pavement reflecting the pale streetlights. But then I saw it, parked on the opposite curb, a shadow against the distant, harsh orange glow of the streetlights, was an unmarked, full-sized white panel van. Its windows were blacked out. And leaning against the front fender, staring up at the darkened fourth-floor window, was a silhouette. The silhouette of a man in a muted jacket, utterly still, waiting. I closed the blind, sinking to the floor, realizing that the midnight aisle stalker hadn't been confined to the Dollar Max in Denver. He had simply followed the hum of my own internal dread across 2 states. Story 2. Price Tag from Beyond. My world, in Raleigh, North Carolina, in November 2021, was defined by the fluorescent glow of a budget retail chain. I was Marcus Lee, 34, a stalker on the graveyard shift. The hours were brutal, but the solitude was usually a blessing. The store, after midnight, was an architectural emptiness. The only sounds were the persistent, low drone of pallet jacks, moving merchandise in the cavernous back room, and the monotonous, slow drip of the air conditioner above the frozen food section. The entire atmosphere was saturated with the faint, sickly sweet scent of clearance stickers and the dry chemical smell of recycled cardboard. I was working in Aisle 12, the disorganized section housing seasonal clearance items. I reached under a high shelf for a new box of inventory, dragging the heavy cardboard container forward. When I lifted the box, I saw it. Resting on the dusty shelf, where the box had been for days, was a small, flimsy slip of paper. It looked exactly like one of our handwritten price tags, the kind we use for damaged goods beige, slightly sticky on the back. But this one was different. Scrawled across the paper in thick, cheap black ink were 2 words. "You're next." My initial reaction was a shrug. Kids. Some bored teenager must have worked the evening shift and left a stupid note. I crumpled the slip, tossing it into the box. Normalcy was a defense mechanism, and I engaged it immediately. The following night, the dread began its slow, inevitable intrusion. I was back in aisle 12. As I reached for a box of cheap ornaments, the same kind of handwritten tag caught my eye. It was stuck to the shelf, but slightly askew. I pulled it off. This one was blank, but underneath it, another tag was already waiting. The ink was the same thick, cheap, black. The message was simply a date at 11/29. A week from that day. I felt a cold prickle of fear. It wasn't a prank. It was a schedule. The tags were not random. They were being placed for me, specifically where my hands would reach. I checked the surveillance footage, but the cameras in aisle 12 were notoriously poor, rendering the area a muddy, distorted blur. I started experiencing sleepless nights. My dreams were filled with the sound of the air conditioner dripping and the sight of my own hands reaching into the darkness, only to grasp a small, ominous piece of paper. The cheap ink of the scrawled notes seemed to leak into my waking thoughts. I checked the surveillance feed every morning, hoping for a clear shot. Nothing. The person was moving with the methodical patience of someone who understood the blind spots. The tags escalated, moving from the anonymous shelf to a location that felt more intimate. I found one, taped to the inside of my locker door. Then one tucked into the cuff of my uniform shirt. The messages were getting shorter, more focused, culminating in one word taped to my time card. Soon. The tension became unbearable. I felt the store, the place that was supposed to be empty and safe, was now constantly populated by an unseen observer. Every shadow seemed to move. Every low drone of the pallet jack seemed to be concealing a pair of approaching footsteps. Finally, I got my answer. I was going through the low-resolution surveillance footage, zooming in on the feed from the central ceiling dome camera, which had a wide, distorted view of the entire floor. I spent hours scrubbing through the muddy images until me. There, a brief, fleeting moment of clarity. The camera caught a figure crossing the main thoroughfare. The person was moving slowly, wearing an employee's vest, but not mine. They stopped, knelt down at aisle 12, and then, in a devastating moment of recognition, I saw the motion, a hand reaching down to place the small white slip onto the shelf. I couldn't identify the face from the blur, but the physical shape, the posture, the deliberate method was unsettlingly familiar. Then, the footage cut to the backroom camera. The figure moved toward the restricted employee lockers, glancing up at the camera dome with a chilling, self-aware certainty. The camera was low resolution, but the outline of the man's head was clear. I recognized the shape, the tired slump of the shoulders. It was Jim, the stalker who worked the evening shift, the one I had exchanged 3 pleasant sentences with every day for months, the one who left the store only an hour before I arrived. My feeling of dread was immediately replaced by a horrifying surge of confrontation. He hadn't been an anonymous ghost. He was a colleague, deliberately using the building's infrastructure, the shift schedules, the blind spots, the shared uniform to stage an elaborate, terrifying psychological attack. I ran to the manager, showed him the stills, and quit on the spot. I didn't wait for Jim to be found. I just ran from the store, leaving the hum of the fluorescent lights and the dripping of the air conditioner behind. I worked until the final closing procedures, grabbing my personal items in a panicked frenzy, as the sun began to cast a pale, weak light over the cracked asphalt of the loading dock. I carried the entire box of tags I had collected, all the notes, the blank slips, the dates out to the large steel dumpster behind the store. I lifted the heavy lid and tossed the entire collection inside, the sound of the cheap plastic and paper echoing hollowly. It's done, I told myself. It's over. I got into my worn-out sedan, ready to drive away from Raleigh forever. I put the key in the ignition and glanced at the dashboard. And then I saw it. Tucked neatly under my windshield wiper was a small, beige piece of paper. I reached out, my fingers trembling, and pulled it free. It was identical to the others, the same cheap paper, the same thick black ink. The message was one word. It was the only word he needed to write. Found. Story 3, Late Night Lurker in the Dollar Store. I was Jade Ruiz, 29, and the closing shift at the discount store in Salem and Oregon was a study in profound, echoing loneliness. It was March 2023, a time of year when the weather felt aggressive and personal. Tonight, a thunderstorm was raging outside. The wind hammered the building's facade, making the cheap metal and glass rattle like loose teeth. After the manager left and the door was locked, the store became a fortress of fluorescent light against the total blackness of the night. My job was simple: face the shelves, clean the registers, and wait for 4:00 a.m. The isolation was intensified by the constant noise from the loading dock. It was a massive concrete chamber at the back of the store that smelled perpetually of wet concrete and diesel fuel. All evening, there was the noisy rhythm of commerce, the loud beep of trucks reversing, the shouting of drivers. But after 2:00 a.m., even that noise died, leaving a silence so heavy it felt dangerous. It was during this heavy silence that I noticed Ben Holloway Parks. He was 38, a delivery driver for a regional distributor, and he had no reason to be there after his 1:00 a.m. drop-off. But he was always there, lingering in the shadows of the loading bay, leaning against his idling truck. He was a stocky man with a face that seemed perpetually obscured by the dim light and the peak of his baseball cap. He became a feature of the background, a silent fixture of the empty back lot. I tried to ignore him, moving from the front of the store toward the back storage areas, keeping my eyes fixed on the task at hand. Then the white ambient dread began to build. Even after the final truck had driven away and the loading dock doors were secured, I started hearing sounds that shouldn't exist. When I was deep in aisle 5, restocking toothpaste, I swore I heard the faint, dragging echo of footsteps coming from the linoleum floor near the front registers. I would freeze, listening hard over the sound of the wind rattling the fire exit. Silence. Absolute, mocking silence. I convinced myself it was the pipes, the old heating system, the wind playing tricks. But the frequency of the sound, always in the moments when I was most isolated, chipped away at my rationality. The fear reached imminent threat status a week later. I was working in the back storage room, organizing boxes of seasonal merchandise. I had the door ajar for light, but the room itself was quiet, the only illumination a harsh, overhead bulb. I knelt down, pulling a heavy box toward me, when my phone, resting on a high shelf, buzzed aggressively. I checked it. It was a file sent from an anonymous number. I opened the message, expecting spam or a joke. It wasn't. It was a short, grainy video clip. It showed me. The footage was shot from a strange, low angle. It was me, kneeling in the aisle, absorbed in stocking the shelves. My movements were clumsy. My hair was falling in my face, all the vulnerable, unself-conscious actions of a person who believes they are utterly alone. The angle was horrifyingly intimate, taken from a hiding spot inside the shelving unit. But the worst detail was the sound the video captured, not only the loud, continuous, thunderstorm winds rattling the store facade, but also my own tired, shallow as sighs as I worked. My whole body went cold. I knew the person who recorded this video had been in the aisle with me. The violation was immediate and physical. I ran to the nearest security camera feed in the break room, shaking. I scrubbed through the footage for the time the video was recorded. The camera showed nothing but my empty, perfectly ordered aisles. That night, my raw fear broke through the final barrier of denial. I had finished closing procedures and was walking toward the front door to meet the manager for handover. The store was dark except for the single emergency light over the exit. I passed the mouth of aisle 7, and I saw him. Ben Holloway Parks. He was standing deep inside the pitch black of the aisle, motionless, a phantom in the retail gloom. He wasn't leaning. He wasn't moving. He was simply standing in the shadows, inside the locked store, long after the loading dock doors were sealed. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't scream. The sound lodged somewhere cold and tight in my chest. He didn't move toward me. He didn't speak. He slowly lifted his hand, and I saw a small silver object glint faintly in the ambient light. A phone or a small camera. He took a picture. The silent, cold flash illuminated his face. For a millisecond, his expression was not angry or threatening, but satisfied. The look of an artist who has finally captured the perfect subject. I turned and ran the final 20 feet to the front door, clawing at the deadbolt. The moment the manager met me, I dissolved into tear. I showed them the video, explained the sighting, but by the time the police searched the store, the aisles were empty. The wet concrete of the loading bay was silent. I left Salem that day, my life reduced to 2 suitcases and the terror of being watched. It's 6 months later. I've moved back to Austin, Texas, living with my sister in a secure, bustling neighborhood. The noise of the city is loud and comforting. The Oregon silence is a distant nightmare. I woke up suddenly in the dead of night. Zarzaway. I had been dreaming of the constant, high-pitched hum of the fluorescent lights. My phone, resting silently on the nightstand, buzzed violently. A single notification from an unknown sender. I didn't want to look. I felt the dry, electric fear crawl across my skin. I opened the message. It contained one image. It was a still frame, taken from a camera resting on a very high shelf. The image was grainy, saturated in green night vision. It showed a long, empty aisle in a discount store. Aisle 5. But the horrifying detail wasn't the aisle itself. It was the timestamp in the corner, 300A, current day. And resting on the floor, in the absolute center of the frame, was a single, white, paper price tag. The watcher hadn't been confined to the discount store in Salem. He was just closer now, and he knew my new time zone. This is the cinematic realism rewrite for Story 4, focusing on the dread of surveillance, the uncanny nature of reflection, and the profound violation of identity. Story 4, Cashier's Reflection. My life in Des Moines, Iowa, in July 2022, revolved around the closing shift at the Dollar Plus store. I was Oliver Grant, 31, and I spent my nights dealing with the dregs of consumerism. The heat was oppressive, but inside the store, the air conditioning was too aggressive, creating a constant, low, artificial chill. The best part of the shift was closing. At 10 p.m., the few lingering shoppers were gone. The manager flipped the switch, and the harsh, neon open sign flickered once, shuddering to closed. After that, there was only the echo of a broom on the tile and the satisfying silence. My workstation was the checkout counter, and immediately behind me, high on the wall, was a wide, slightly curved security mirror. It was standard issue, designed to give cashiers a view of the aisle behind them. I was used to seeing my own reflection, tired eyes, slumped shoulders, the faint logo of the Dollar Plus vest. The first time it happened, I was polishing the register screen. The manager was whistling softly in the back aisle. The store was technically closed. The front door locked. I glanced up at the mirror to check my appearance, and my heart seized. Reflected in the glass, standing directly behind me, was a figure, a man. He was tall and wore a nondescript gray jacket. His face was pale and utterly devoid of expression, but his eyes were fixed on me. The mirror was curved, and the image seemed distorted, stretched unnaturally wide. I froze, the cleaning rag slipping from my hand. My mind immediately engaged the logical protocols. I'm tired. The light is tricky. It's the manager. I snapped my head around. The space behind me was empty. Just the end cap displays and the long, silent aisle. I spun back to the mirror. The figure was gone. Only my own wide-eyed reflection remained. I spent the next 20 minutes rationalizing the incident, a trick of the curved glass, a phantom of the bright fluorescent lights. Pure exhaustion, but the cold dread lingered, a sickening sensation of being watched through the glass of the door and the one behind me. The next night, I was hyper-aware. I kept glancing at the security mirror, expecting the phantom to reappear. It didn't. I settled into the quiet routine, the low drone of the air conditioner, the only sound. Then, at 10:30 p.m., as I was counting the final till, I saw it again. It was subtle this time. In the distant, distorted corner of the mirror, the pale, impassive face was visible. The figure was standing further away, near the seasonal display in aisle 4. He was looking not at me, but at the register, watching my hands move across the keys. I turned my head slowly, trying to catch him out of the corner of my eye. Nothing. The aisle was empty. My fear deepened. I realized the reflection was not a trick of the light. It was an alternate reality, a sliver of the store that existed only in the glass. The figure was real, but only visible when I wasn't looking directly at him. I decided to check the security tapes. The process was agonizingly slow. I isolated the time windows when I saw the reflection. The footage showed the aisles empty, the floor gleaming under the lights. But when I zoomed in on the high-angle camera that captured the mirror itself, I noticed a distortion, a faint, human-shaped shadow that moved within the mirror's glass, entirely independent of the physical reality of the store. My journey from brushing it off to profound dread was complete. I was dealing with something paranormal, a figure existing solely as a reflection. The horror became tangible on the final night. I was performing the nightly shutdown, printing the final sales receipt, the one with my name, Oliver Grant, printed neatly at the top. I glanced up at the mirror, trying to be casual. The figure was back, closer than ever. He was standing directly behind my left shoulder, his reflection pressed against mine in the glass. His eyes were wide, and his pale lips were curled into a slow, deliberate smile. My body locked up. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I was forced to stare at the impossible, terrifying image, my own reflection overlaid with the reflection of the impassive stalker. The figure in the glass raised his hand, a mirrored image of my own, and his reflection reached out, past my reflection, toward the physical counter. I felt a cold rush of air at my ear. The figure in the mirror suddenly blurred, becoming solid. I blinked, and the reflection was gone. I spun around. The space behind me was empty, silent. But on the counter, where the final, long receipt had been resting, there was only the faint smudge of thermal ink. The white receipt with my name printed on it was gone. The mirror image had crossed the barrier. It had become real, reaching out of the glass to steal a piece of my identity. I stared at the empty counter, realizing that the reflection hadn't just been watching me. It had been waiting for something tangible, something that connected it directly to me. I walked out of that $+ forever, leaving the keys, the alarm code, and the terrifying mirror behind, fleeing the cold, relentless logic of the impossible. It's 6 months later. I am now working a low-stress maintenance job in a corporate building in Seattle, Washington. The distance and the change felt like adequate protection. I finished my shift and walked into the sterile, brightly lit parking garage elevator. I pressed the button for the street level. The door closed with a soft whoosh. The elevator was lined entirely with polished steel panels, acting as seamless mirrors. I stared at my own reflection, tired but relieved, enjoying the silent, brief solitude. As the elevator began its smooth descent, I caught a slight distortion in the steel panel behind me. I looked closer, and my breath hitched. Reflected in the mirrored steel, standing directly behind my reflection, was the same pale, impassive figure in the gray jacket. His eyes, fixed on my own, were wide and cold. He wasn't standing in the physical space of the elevator, only his reflection was there. And on the panel next to his reflection, I saw a faint, distorted white mark. It was the outline of a small, rectangular piece of paper, seemingly pressed between the reflection and the metal. The figure in the mirror slowly raised his hand and brought it close to his reflection's chest, where a faint, white strip of paper was visible. It was the receipt, the one with my name on it, now a permanent feature of his mirrored identity. The elevator chimed, announcing my arrival. The reflection vanished instantly, leaving only the polished steel and my own terrified face. I stumbled out of the elevator, knowing that the figure wasn't trapped in a mirror in Des Moines. He was now permanently a part of my reflection, waiting for the next chance to step into my world. Story 5, Vanishing Customer, Mr. Alcott. I was Priya Desai, 27, and the smell of the discount store in Mesa, Arizona, in September 2021 was a permanent fixture in my life. It was a noxious chemical blend of cheap polyester, dust, and melting at plastic toys, the signature scent of consumer anonymity. I took the part-time job to pay for school, but it became a study in late-night dread. My shifts always ended at 11 p.m. Closing time was marked by the high, irritating buzzing of the overhead speaker, announcing the final 10 minutes. As the doors locked and the main lights dimmed, the store was bathed in the unsettling, aggressive red glow of the exit signs. Hey. That's when Mr. Alcott always came in. He was a man in his 60s, quiet, neat, and immediately forgettable. He would enter precisely at 10:55 p.m., wander the aisles, and usually buy a single, random item, a box of tea bags, a pack of batteries, an emergency poncho. He was a creature of absolute routine, and his arrival became the final, inevitable beat of my day. The first anomaly was small, easily dismissible. I was reconciling the final receipts of the night. Mr. Alcott's receipt was always there, showing a recorded transaction and a total of $3 or $4, but the cash was never in the till. I told the manager it was a ghost charge, a glitch in the old register software. The manager, preoccupied with theft, lectured me on counting procedure, but I knew my count was right. The cash simply wasn't there. Yet the machine insisted the purchase had happened. The dread deepened the following week. Mr. Alcott came in, bought a single cheap flashlight, and left. I checked the CCTV the next morning, hoping to prove the till was faulty. I reviewed the footage from the front door camera, 10:55 p.m. Mr. Alcott enters. I scrubbed forward, minute by minute, waiting to see him exit. He didn't. The footage ran past 11:00 p.m., past 11:15 p.m. The last customers left. The main lights went out. The manager locked the door. Mr. Alcott never left the store. I watched the same footage 6 times. The camera angle static, the digital timestamp advancing relentlessly. He walked into the cleaning supplies aisle at 10:58 p.m., and then, in the cold, unblinking eye of the security camera, he ceased to exist. The receipt proved he made a purchase. The camera proved he was still inside the locked building. My rational mind fractured. I spent the next shift walking the store, feeling the hair on the back of my neck prickle. I started hearing faint, unplaceable sounds, the shuffle of plastic, a soft cough coming from the darkest, quietest corners of the store. The smell of bargain clothes and plastic was suddenly suffocating. The horror became tangible when I realized his pattern. He always purchased an item from the back corners of the store: cleaning, hardware, storage. I began tracing his last movements on the footage, charting the exact spot where he always disappeared. It was always aisle 9, directly behind the tall, heavy shelving unit that held surplus boxes of winter inventory. I waited until closing time. The red exit signs glowed. The manager was gone, and the store was silent. I didn't search. I went straight to aisle 9. The shelving unit was anchored into the concrete floor, heavy and cold. I knelt down, shining my phone light into the space between the shelves and the concrete wall. The light didn't just hit the concrete. It plunged into a narrow, concealed passage. The wall behind the shelving unit wasn't the exterior of the building. It was a thin partition, creating a tight, hidden storage space, wide enough for a person to stand in. The partition was slightly warped, covered in dust and cobwebs, but clearly penetrable. I pushed against the unit, and the heavy metal scraped against the tile. It was possible to move the unit just enough to slip into the gap. As I did, the stale smell of the store was replaced by a gust of cold, foul air, a deep metallic odor, like iron and ozone. I shone my light into the darkness. The small space was empty, but against the far concrete wall, tucked neatly into a crack, were dozens of folded slips of paper. They were receipts, all bearing the dollar store logo, all with transaction totals of less than $5, and all dated over a period of 5 years. And every single one was signed at the bottom, meticulously and faintly, in cheap ink. Alcott. He wasn't vanishing, he was entering a hidden space, in the store, making a ritualistic purchase, and leaving only the record of his presence behind. He had been doing this for years, using the store not as a place of commerce, but as a gateway. I felt the cold realization the cash wasn't missing because he was a thief. The cash was missing because the purchase wasn't meant to be real. I walked out, leaving the receipts and the hidden passage, terrified by the cold reality that the store I worked in contained a terrifying, impossible secret. It's 2 years later. I finished school and moved to Chicago, where I work as an accountant. The architecture is steel and glass. The only scent is sterile and new. I finally feel safe. 2 days ago, I ordered a small desk organizer online. I wasn't expecting any other deliveries. This morning, I found a small padded envelope taped to my apartment door. Inside was a tiny plastic toy package, a miniature soldier, still sealed in the cheap plastic and cardboard. Tucked between the soldier and the plastic was a single flimsy slip of paper. It was a receipt. The paper was beige, the ink cheap and black. The transaction was for $2.49. My heart hammered against my ribs. I looked at the bottom of the receipt. The signature was faint, meticulous, and agonizingly familiar. Alcott. And beneath the name, written in the same cheap ink, was a single, devastating word. Story 6, The Dollar Bin. Caller lot 150. My name is Ethan Cole, 33, and the manager of a Life Value Dollar in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Inside December 2022, my world was a relentless cycle of holiday inventory and endless, dreary shifts. The store was suffocatingly festive, filled with the cheap, chemical-laden scent of dollar store holiday decorations hanging above the rattling shopping carts. Outside, the dreary winter twilight was a constant visual reminder of the cold isolation. I was technically in charge, but the truth was I was just another component of the machine. The calls started the week before Christmas. They came exclusively to the back office landline, the one reserved for corporate and vendors. The first call was simple. I picked up, expecting the regional distributor. The voice on the other end was distorted, flattened by static, but clearly male. It was measured, toneless, and academic, the same unsettling calm I remembered hearing in the stories of my acquaintances. I see the midnight aisle stalker didn't sell well, the voice stated. Maybe move him to the 5 bin. I laughed it off. A prank call. Some idiot kid got hold of the number. The only thing I recognized was the unsettling crackle of the hold music lines ringing in my ear when he hung up. But the calls continued, always late, always referencing inventory that shouldn't be known. And the one's cashier's reflection is stuck in the clearance section. Too much internal breakage. Mark him down further. The man from the price tag story needs new packaging. Use the recycled cardboard from lot 150. I began to feel a chill that had nothing to do with the Wisconsin winter. The calls were too specific, referencing items, processes, and even private fears I had shared only in passing. My arc shifted from polite annoyance to profound paranoia. I started spending hours in the back office, monitoring the lines, the air heavy with the chemical smell of plastic decorations. Then, the caller's references became devastatingly precise, referencing the trauma of the other stories I had heard. One night, the voice returned. "Ethan," it said, its voice dropping to an intimate whisper. "Your display is incomplete. You need to restock aisle 5 with the vanishing customer." I froze. Aisle 5 was the aisle I had just finished stocking 3 minutes prior. "Who is this?" I demanded, my voice breaking. "It's the new management," the voice replied, followed by a dry, emotionless chuckle. "I've acquired the entire inventory. All 7 true stories are now part of my collection. You are the final piece. Ethan." The connection was terrifyingly clear. The caller, Lot 150, was the curator, the one who orchestrated the fear across state lines, the collector who viewed our lives as purchasable goods to be moved from the shelves of normal life to the $1 bin of horror. The final violation came the next morning. I had been working a triple shift, collapsing into an exhausted 2-hour sleep in the small, rarely used manager's office. The office was windowless, the door always triple locked. I woke up groggy, the fluorescent hum echoing in my head. Taped to the small corkboard above my desk was a Polaroid photograph. It was slightly grainy, lit by the harsh, unflattering ceiling light of the office. The subject was me. I was asleep on the cheap, worn sofa, my mouth slightly open, my posture utterly defeated. The photo was taken from a high angle, looking down. In the foreground, resting on the desk, was the office landline I had used for the calls. The realization was a crushing weight. The calls weren't remote. He wasn't tracking me through the phone lines. He had been inside the locked office, watching me, waiting until I was at my most vulnerable. My reality fractured completely. The manager's office, the final fortress of authority, had been breached. The metallic click of the security alarm had been a lie. I walked out of Life Value Dollar that minute. I didn't lock the door. I left the keys and the final paperwork on the counter, fleeing the pervasive chemical smell of plastic and the relentless, high-pitched hum of the fluorescent lights. I abandoned the inventory, the store, and the role of manager, becoming just another fugitive in the vast, terrifying retail landscape. I drove east out of Milwaukee, pushing my old car past the limits of its endurance. By dawn, the weak winter sun cast a pale, weak light over the empty, residential streets. I felt a faint, momentary relief as the city receded. I glanced in my rearview mirror. The street behind me was completely empty, the asphalt wet and dark. But then, in the very center of the mirror, I saw a single stainless steel and shopping cart. It was being pushed slowly, deliberately, down the absolute center of the empty street. There was no one pushing it. It seemed to move under its own horrifying, silent momentum. The faint squeak of its rusty wheels was the only sound in the growing light. I accelerated, my hands locked on the wheel, watching the cart grow smaller, knowing that the ultimate inventory had been taken, and my file, Lot 150, was already tagged and ready for delivery. The thing about stories like these is that they never really end where you think they do. The lights go out, the aisles empty, and everyone tells themselves they're safe once they step outside. But sometimes the dark doesn't stay in the store. Sometimes it follows you home. Pause, faint tap sound, like a coin dropping. If you've ever walked through a dollar store after midnight and felt someone standing just behind the shelves, you already know how these stories begin. Sleep light tonight. And if you hear the hum of fluorescence when your lights are off, don't look for the switch. Long silent static fades out. This has been Fearmonger. If you made it this far, make sure to like, subscribe, and let us know where you're watching from and what time it is right now. Because the shadows, they always keep track of time.